English translation, 230th Contact, Part 3. Wednesday, 11th October 1989, Order 401 hours.
Then something somewhat less belligerent. Among the Earth humans, the saying always goes that the eyes are the mirror of the soul, whereby soul, of course, means the psyche. However, Sim-Ya Se once said something similar about the hair, but unfortunately, I do not remember what precisely she said. Can you give me a leg up?
Our saying is, the eyes are the mirror of the psyche, but there is also the expression, the hair is the mirror of the life energy. In relation to the psyche, there is probably no need for me to teach you. But in relation to the hair and the life energy, the following can be explained. The hair is, as you know, an organ of the body, and the hair is a signal of the life energy that flows through the body. That can be expressed as this. The fuller, healthier, and stronger the hair is, the bigger and stronger is the life energy of the body and the consciousness, which is why we also say that the hair is the mirror, the antenna, and the state of health of the consciousness power. This statement is based on reality, which is why hair should never be dyed, except for necessary medical interventions, because dyeing the hair affects certain parts of the life energy just as much as products and nutrition that stiffen the hair. The more conscious a human being lives, and the greater his or her life energy is, as a result of this, the more powerful and healthy his or her hair is, as well as his or her sense of taste and smell. Thereby it must, however, be taken into consideration that sparse as well as full growth, that is to say dense hair, must not be assessed in terms of health and life energy, because if we are talking about full hair, then this means its fully healthy state. Healthy, strong hair, therefore, primarily says something about the amount and the state of the actual life energy, but also about the sense of taste and smell as to whether they function normally or whether they are damaged, whereby in the latter case, food combinations are eaten and found to be good, which truthfully do not fit together and are disgusting, such as, for example, meat with berries or fruits, etc., as is the case with Earth humans who eat inappropriately mixed food with an impaired sense of taste and smell. The impaired sense of taste is based on defective, that is to say, modified genes on the one hand, but also on educational instilling. Especially the kidneys are responsible for the health and growth of the hair, along with hormones, vitamins, trace elements, and minerals. It is also interesting to know that a lot of the sweets, such as sugar confectionery, etc., produces heavy and greasy hair, while less sugar substances make light and dry hair.
Thank you. This is actually more than I wanted to know. Now tell me, why are the domestic animals of Earth humans much smaller than they were originally in the wild, as Sim-Ya Se once told me? And is that really true?
Yes, that is indeed of rightness. The reason why animals become smaller when they are kept in the care of the human beings and in buildings is that the natural course of evolution is influenced in such a manner that a devolution, that is to say, a retrogression in the development, takes place, because the animals, robbed of their natural environment and way of life, fall victim to a weakening. In the domestic care of the human beings, the animals do not need any more the major strength and also no more the toughness as well as the larger body proportions and the moves, which they need in the open nature, that is to say, in the wilderness. Consequently, they change devolutionarily in this regard. The same has also happened to the human being, who has become more and more refined and weakened in his or her body build, as well as in his or her strength, moves and body proportions, etc., which will continue to happen due to the irrational mode of life and the raising standard of living.
We have already talked on several occasions about the steadily growing change in the climate. which under certain circumstances can lead to a climate catastrophe of the kind that has already occurred at very early times. Can you in that regard tell me when the Earth was last affected globally by a really big climate catastrophe and what it looked like?
There were two of them during the last millennia, one 5,000 years ago and the other 4,200 years ago. During this last one, there was an enormous period of cold and heat globally for decades, whereby everything dried out, such as, for example, brooks, rivers, and even streams, along with many small, medium, and large seas. This resulted in enormous famines worldwide which claimed the lives of countless human beings. Year after year, the harvests also became worse, and the longer, the more the human beings began to fight among themselves for the food. Even all kinds of wild animals, birds, snakes, insects, rats, worms, and mice were hunted and eaten. In addition to the fact that all domestic animals such as cats, dogs, poultry, rabbits, sheep, pigs, goats, horses, camels, and cattle served as food, which in the end, however, were also used up. Getting into ever greater famine, people chased each other's food by murder and manslaughter, even if it was rats and mice or insects. Then everything became so bad that many became cannibals, for whom the killed ones served as food. In the end, human cannibalism perverted to such an extent that in many places children were literally slaughtered and used for food. Thus children were even killed and literally eaten by their own parents and older siblings. As far as I know, however, my friend, Sfath and Simya say, have already given you various explanations in this regard. Myself, I suppose that you have not forgotten all their descriptions and explanations, but just want to repeat them.
Yes, that is correct, but there are no records of conversations concerning this, which is why I asked you again about it. Speaking of killing and eating children and also adult human beings as a result of the famine, it is said to have been especially bad in Egypt. At least that was what Sfath and Simyase said.
That is of rightness, but in this regard the same events took place worldwide, because the multi-year climate catastrophes 4,200 years ago and that 5,000 years ago were global in nature.
Do you mean that children and adults were killed and eaten during both climate disasters?
That is of rightness, only that one of the climate catastrophes lasted decades and the other only corresponded to a drought of several years, which, however, also had terrible consequences.
Both were thus of a global nature. Did the whole of the two events also have something to do with the galactic radiation we were talking about?
Yeah.
I thought so. Good. While we are already talking about the outer space, we have already often talked about comets, meteors, and asteroids. We also talked about this during our 223rd contact on 1st May last year, when you explained that our astronomers would discover many such outer space wanderers in the future. Afterwards, you also explained that a wandering asteroid called Soren, which would have a size of more than 1,000 meters and take a path around the Sun, would come very close to the Earth in 2014. Can you tell me if this object has already been discovered or not, and how close the asteroid will come to the Earth and when?
The asteroid has not yet been discovered by terrestrial astronomers, but our records of the future indicate that it will be discovered in the autumn of 2003. An approaching by the asteroid to the Earth will take place in the month of March 2014, namely to a little less than 50,000 kilometers if everything remains within the framework as it currently stands.
Devilishly close.
That is of rightness.
But I guess there is nothing we can do about it. But let us stay in the outer space. At the 123rd recorded contact on 4 June 1979, thus 10 years ago, Yase and I had a conversation about the Jupiter moons. Here, that was briefly said. Quote, Billy, just one last question, also concerning Jupiter, which in fact has many dozens of moons, however only a few large but more smaller entities, which are actually not real moons and have not yet been discovered, just because they are so small. There are almost 100, if I am not mistaken, or even more, and actually they are fragments and other smaller objects captured by Jupiter. Will they be discovered in the near future? And may I talk about them? Yase, you should at least for another 20 years remain silent about this. But these Jupiter satellites will, however, in any case be discovered by terrestrial astronomers.
I am familiar with your conversation back then.
So far, I haven't heard much about new discoveries of Jupiter moons.
You will have to be patient for another 10 or a few more years, because it is only through the Hubble Space Telescope, which I already told you about some time ago, and which next year will be brought into a circular orbit around the Earth at an altitude of around 600 kilometers above the Earth, that many new things will be discovered in the outer space, including further moons of the Soel satellites. A distant relative of Pluto Tagus Anzeiger, Zurich, Tuesday, 16th of March 2004. From the Earth and from the Hubble telescope, many asteroids and moons of the Sol planets as well as new comets. Planetoids and meteors beyond Pluto will be discovered in the years and decades to come, as well as distant foreign planets, new solar systems and new galaxies, etc.
Therefore, can one now openly talk about the fact that Jupiter has a very large number of small and smallest moons? That also Saturn as well as Uranus and Neptune have a whole lot more moons than I was allowed to tell so far? Also, the information about Pluto having only one moon is not correct.
No, you have to keep quiet about that. The time has not yet come to talk openly about it, since you would make a fool of yourself with such too early information, which could be harmful to your task. It is already enough that you have been insulted for your open statements about Mars, as well as for the ring systems of lying, cheating, deception, charlatanry, fantasy, and so on. So silence is called for until these mentioned facts can be proven openly by scientists.
Fine, then L will be silent. The truth will eventually come to light one way or another. But since we are already talking about the moons, at least the large ones, exert after all enormous influences on the planets. Just as also with the Earth, where the Earth-Moon exerts enormous forces with regard to ebb and flow, as well as with regard to the growth of the plants, the climate, and the weather. The power of the sun is also involved in this. All life forms are also influenced by the lunar powers and solar powers, thus also the human being. Yase once said that moon and sun stir all waters by their enormous forces, especially the oceans of the earth, which are turned by the tides from top to bottom and from bottom to top. I also saw this on 30th May 1987, when I was allowed to dive with you into different deep seas, which was a very special experience for me. Everything was just gigantic, namely not only the huge deep-sea creatures, but also the smaller ones, and those with their own light sources, which were particularly impressive. But just as impressive were the big and almost 100-meter-high mineral towers, that is to say mineral columns at the bottom of the Atlantic. They are said to have originated from hot mineral and lime water shooting up from the interior of the Earth. And as you have explained, water would in that context not only be stored in the upper layers of the Earth, but even several hundred kilometers deep in the inner mantle of the Earth, in certain layers of rock, etc., and in fact so abundantly that it exceeds the mass of all water on the Earth's surface.
That is of rightness.
So that is clear. Tell me, what do you think of the bad music that is evidently starting to gain a foothold on Earth?
This is an extremely deplorable matter, because now comes the time as I know from a view of the future, in which many evils will appear. Worldwide, more and more parents are deteriorating, who sexually abuse their children, push them into prostitution, rent them out for this purpose, and sell them for child pornography, etc., whereby they are, however, also subjected to terrible torments, and they are even murdered. Apart from this, more and more children will commit suicide over time, with the suicide rate rising unstoppably. In the future, the harmonic music will be largely substituted by unbelievably disharmonic noise, which is called modern music style. This results in a total disharmony that seizes countless individuals, namely young adolescents and adults. Tremendously large disharmonic noise events of this kind will take place in the future, whereby in many cases all decency and self-esteem will be trampled underfoot. Many will become criminals in order to indulge in this dignityless activity, and the addiction to drugs and the criminality associated with it will also increase to an immeasurable extent worldwide, as will the unemployment and prostitution, which will be shamelessly publicly advertised in the press and on television. All this in addition to the fact that porn prostitution will become a state-approved trade and will be taxed like public prostitution. However, that will not be the whole story, because the language will also deteriorate, since the languages of the world will be Americanized by the disgraceful might of U.S. America. Since the First World War, the U.S.-American secret plan has been aimed at eradicating the German language in particular, and that in connection with the secret U.S.-American world domination plans. By the whole disharmony, however, the German language with all its varieties and dialects is contaminated by a wrong stressing of the words in the spoken sentences, which furthers the whole disharmony even more, and which will also exert an extremely negative influence on the rulers, the company leaders, the economic magnates and the military, etc. As a result of all this, new wars will occur as well as enormous state, economy, and private debts. Economic collapses due to irresponsible mismanagement, exploitations of many companies by their managers, bankruptcies into which companies will be driven by managers and economic mismanagement, which will lead to a tremendously high unemployment worldwide and under certain circumstances can cause an economic and states collapse in all industrialized countries. And throughout the world an enormous terrorism will appear, which in the time to come will be carried out in a religious, sectarian, secret service, and open political form to a great extent by suicide bombers, as well as by other cowardly attacks on innocent ones and their belongings. In addition, all sorts of radical political, anarchistic, and sectarian religious extremist groups will appear on the scene, such as so-called skinheads and neo-Nazis, etc., as well as political, religious, and sectarian state power holders, who will be fanatics and conscienceless and irresponsible warmongers, war criminals, and murderers.
Well, that is something for humankind to look forward to. However, there is, as usual, probably nothing that can be changed, because it will be the same as it has been since time immemorial. When prophecies, probability calculations as well as predictions are made and publicized by those with the knowledge, then they will only be laughed at, frowned upon, and described as lunatics, or they will even be harmed, will be persecuted, severely denigrated and slandered, and finally even their life will be sought. That will probably also not change in the future. When I think of the suicides of children, one need not be surprised. Already today, more and more children are killing themselves, whereby often both the parents and the pedagogues are to blame for it. The parents abuse or disregard the children, leave them completely to themselves and to their fate, which makes them fall for drugs and criminality, if they are not even directly driven to do so by the parents themselves. The parents do not assist their children, neither with advice nor with action, let them fall into neglect, deprive them of love, and treat them like the lowest dirt. The parents prefer to go to work in order to earn a lot of money, and to be able to lead a fast life instead of caring for the children, educating them and giving them protection and love, as well as an atmosphere of shelter. And many pedagogues, who should, in addition to the parents, also provide the children with a degree of education, likewise fail miserably, because they too are only interested in the money, but not in the well-being of the children. The same applies to many parish priests and parish women. And, let us be forthright about this shame, children are often sexually abused by father and mother, as well as by pedagogues and parish priests and parish women. All of this, however, does not only happen when the children are older, but already in their infancy. Already in early years they are deprived of all love and care, as well as an atmosphere of shelter, whereby they cannot build up any self-esteem or appreciation of their own value and create any trust in a valueful reference person. Thus, the children become completely lacking in guidance and helpless, whereby they drift off into drugs and alcohol, into crime and prostitution, as well as into coldness of thought and feeling. Do not recognize the sense of life and do not comprehend it. Become weary of life, fall into despair, and ultimately put an end to their own lives. At the same time, the fallible parents, pedagogues, and parishioners, etc., are completely blind to the signals of the children pointing to their inner hardship and hell. And, here again the shame shall be said, also many professional psychologists and psychiatrists fit into the same framework as many parents, pedagogues, parish men, and parish women. They all claim to be super clever, but the truth is that they are only lowly intelligent and megalomaniacs and understand very little or nothing at all about children's psyche and the psyche of the human being.
As far as the prophets are concerned, it has actually been like this since ancient times and will also remain like this for a very long time to come. And what you say regarding the children and the educators is unfortunately sad reality, which will get even much worse in the time to come.
Quite some time ago, on the equinox of the day and night, when I could observe with you the gigantic tidal wave at the Amazon, which swept hundreds of kilometers up the river from the ocean and from the Amazon Delta, you explained to me that this phenomenon would occur every time the sun and the moon take up an important specific position. Unfortunately, I forgot what you explained in this regard.
The Amazon flood wave always occurs when the sun, the earth, and the moon are on one axis, that is to say, one line. The forces of the sun and the moon exerting themselves on the earth, that is to say, the waters of the ocean, which oppose each other on both sides of the earth, lead to the tidal wave that forms in the Amazon Delta during the tide of the ocean and unstoppably rolls up the stream with great gevalt, whereby it often causes very great damage.
Now that was the explanation. The sun has a much greater influence on the Earth's climate, and on the tides of the oceans, and on all life forms than scientists still assume until now. Also, with regard to the activity cycles of the sun, the scientists still do not know that there is not only one cycle of 11 years, but that there are several, in fact another one lasting 22 years, and a third one lasting 88 years, as well as another 3, to be calculated in centuries and millennia, as Sfath already said before. But while we are talking about the Earth's climate and so on, I have received an inquiry from U.S. America on when would have to be expect unusual hurricanes in Florida and New Orleans. Some folks want to change their domicile and to know how much time they have for the move.
By way of exception, I would like to give an answer, because I think it is sensible to undertake a change of residence from 2 endangered areas. Our foresight indicates that Florida will be hit by a hurricane on 24 August 1992, and that enormous damage will be inflicted. A number of lives will also be lost on the 2 days the storm rages. It will then be a catastrophe as it has never happened in recent times in Florida to my knowledge. According to our calculations, the hurricane will draw around 230 million tons of water vapor from the ocean every day and cause torrential rainstorms to descend. We have calculated the speed of the storm at almost 300 kilometers per hour. A similar situation will threaten New Orleans in 1998, but the enormous storm, which will be calculated as Category 4, will turn away close to New Orleans and change its direction. If this were not to happen, entire areas would drown under the raging floods, including all human beings and other life forms. All of America, Bermuda, China, Europe, Japan, and Korea, etc., will also be hit by tremendous storms, severe weather, and hurricanes. This will be the case starting in September 2003. First snow will fall in Europe as early as 7 October in the lowlands and cause considerable damage.
New Orleans is sinking deeper and deeper into the ground and is already about 2 meters below sea level, as you have explained to me. Also, the whole area surrounding it is slowly but surely drowning in the sea.
This corresponds to correctness. Therefore, there is also the danger of total flooding and destruction of New Orleans if the storms and water become too violent.
This is something they know about there, which is why it is not understandable that no total relocation to a safe area takes place. But the human beings are just stubborn and prefer to accept death and destruction than to get to safety for themselves. But now, for once, something about the gold that has so far been found on Earth. Do you have any idea how much of a mass that actually is? We have recently occupied ourselves with it, and could not find out, however, which mass extent the discoveries so far might have.
About this, we have very precise records, which I will retrieve now. In a few moments, I will be able to tell you the result. Yes, here. Calculated in cubic meters, there are 5832 of them, note. The 7,000 million newtons, that is to say 7 giganewtons, that is to say 109 bars, about 100,000 tons mass, that is to say substance quantity of gold, specific weight 19.3.
We were talking about the melting of the ice of the glaciers and the poles, which makes me wonder whether, with regard to the poles, there have not already been such large melts in the past, just as you have announced them for the time to come.
The ice masses of the Arctic and Antarctic, that is to say the North Pole and the South Pole, grow and melt in the same way as the glaciers do. Thereby cyclical aspects play an important role as well as sporadic ones, which we at our place call natural non-periodic events. But to answer your question more specifically, the last major polar ice melting on the Earth took place at the North Pole, namely during about 32 years from 1898 to 1930, as our records attest.
Interesting. As far as I know, none of this is known to us. But maybe it will still be researched and found out.
That is to be assumed.
Are you an expert on terrestrial insects? By which I mean mosquitoes?
My knowledge is limited in this area. I may have learnt some things about such terrestrial life forms, but I cannot call myself with enough specialized field knowledge to be able to explain such living creatures in a defining way. My actual knowledge refers to the variety of genera and species known to us of such life forms on the Earth, namely about 1 million of them. My knowledge in this respect also includes the geographical distribution of the life forms.
Great. Would you then also know how the critters spread and then where to?
Yes. But I have already explained to you once before that insects, as well as all kinds of mammals, birds, snakes, crocodiles, and turtles, etc., spread from their countries of origin to other countries by being carried off with food transports, by tourists and all kinds of merchandise. Furthermore, however, There is also a worldwide trade with such life forms, whereby these are then kept in houses and on occasion released back into the open nature, where they acclimatize and reproduce.
Ah, that is exactly what I wanted to get at. A few years ago, when I was with Ferdinand Pfeifenberger in southern France and in Italy, after which we spent then another 2 days in the Ticino, we had an insect in our car in Mendrisio, which looked devilishly like a tiger mosquito, as I know them from Asia. Of course I killed the thing, because I did not want to be stung, since the tiger mosquitoes can well transfer all sorts of diseases, such as, for example, the dengue fever, etc. That is what I told Ferdinand, but he considered my suspicion to be ridiculous. Therefore I stopped talking about it and let everything rest. But now that it comes to my mind again, I would like to ask you if it is actually possible that it could after all have been a tiger mosquito. I just cannot get rid of the suspicion. In Latin, the insect, if I remember correctly, is called Aedes albopicus or similar. However, I do not know anymore whether the name is correct, because it has been a long time since I read the Latin name of the insect in a reference book.
Aedes albopictus. And that is the Latin name of the insect. In fact, there is a possibility that you had such an insect in your car and killed it. Because in 1978, according to our research, these insects were brought to Europe from Asia with merchandise, whereby they have since acclimatized in Turkey and Greece as well as in Yugoslavia, Albania, Italy, Belgium, Germany, France, and southern Switzerland. In many places, this fact has not yet been recognized, but it is probably only a matter of time before the insect will be discovered everywhere, which will be at the latest by the time acclimatization is complete and the insects reproduce in larger breeding colonies.
Not exactly pleasant. But tell me, we talked about it a while ago. Regarding the drinking, you said that too much liquid would wash out salts, minerals, trace elements and vitamins from the brain and from the body, which would lead to all sorts of ills and even death. But now that our doctors and all sorts of other folks keep claiming that at least 2 to 3 liters of water or something equivalent have to be drunk every day, the question arises about the amount to be assumed, where a harmful effect on the body and the brain arises.
This depends on the needs of the brain and the whole body, the organs and the muscles, etc. Thus, thirst is not simply thirst, because many human beings drink a lot because they imagine that they are thirsty, even though their body does not need any supply of fluid. The more they drink in the process, the more liquids that are saturated in the body and brain with vital salts, trace elements, vitamins, and minerals, they excrete again through sweating and urination. Therefore, the rule applies that liquid must only be drunk when one is really thirsty, whereby this must be calculated proportionally to the physical exertions. For the highest and greatest physical exertions, a maximum of 3.3 to 15.15 deciliters of pure liquid such as water, tea, or coffee, with little or no sugar applies. During hot weather, it is thereby advisable and of greatest benefit if water, tea, or coffee are drunk as hot as possible. Otherwise, also, cool drinks can be drunk in equal measure and in small sips. If there is no great physical exertion, it is very advisable to keep the fluid reduced to such an extent that one only drinks when one is really thirsty. This means that the body may under certain circumstances not need to be supplied with any particular fluid, because the food alone is already sufficient to supply the brain and body, etc., with the necessary fluid. If, however, too much is drunk, this not only causes damage in the form now mentioned several times, but the brain function is also negatively affected. This means that the ability of thoughts and the function of feelings, as well as the ability of rationality, self-responsibility, and the ability to make logical decisions are impaired, as well as the capacity of intelligence, which falls victim to reduction and paralysis.
If alcohol is involved, I suppose the situation is even worse. Beer and cider should also have the same effects if they are drunk regularly, or am I wrong?
No, you are not mistaken. As with any alcohol, for beer and cider too, it is the case that the same consequences occur as for other liquids. If beer and cider are drunk regularly in larger quantities, then a so-called gentle stupefaction occurs, which the persons drinking these substances are nevertheless not realizing, and which often remains unnoticed by the environment too. The world of thoughts and feelings is dulled by beer and cider, as is the case with any other alcoholic beverage, but this dullness is not perceived by those affected by it themselves, just because they have already fallen into dullness.
Ultimately, everything out of this can then end in dementia. A self-bred, that is to say, self-acquired mental deficiency that is based on irreparable brain damage, that is to say, damage to consciousness caused by alcohol. A condition which is also called drinker's mental deficiency, and from which finally the drinker's insanity, that is to say, the delirium tremens, results.
For this no further explanation is necessary.
Fine, too. Then I come up with a question that you as a doctor should certainly be able to answer. I have heard several times that fruits and vegetables would be very healthy for small children, especially infants. In my childhood, however, I witnessed the death of a 7-month-old baby of a woman I knew, living in the Grampenweg in Bulach. She had fed it constantly with fresh vegetable pulp, pap, and fruit pulp. That hit me hard. I was 10 years old at the time and knew the woman and the baby well. Svath told me then that the child had died of a severe nitrate poisoning as a result of the vegetable food. Unfortunately, I do not know anymore. Maybe you can explain something on this subject?
I can do that, yes. Many fresh vegetables, as well as vegetables in general, usually contain a lot of nitrate, which is why infants are not allowed to be given such food or only in very small amounts. Larger amounts lead to severe nitrate poisoning, which is usually fatal. The entire metabolism of the infant is geared towards breast milk, which is why, during the first months of life, only this food or a suitable substitute may be given to the infant. If this is disregarded and the food is changed over to vegetables, meat, or fruit too early, this can be life-threatening for the infant and even lead to death. In other words, all kinds of meat and all kinds of fruit can also be very dangerous for infants, and particularly if a quantity is not respected, which is adapted to the metabolism, the health, and the overall constitution of the infant's body.
Well, that is something for humankind to look forward to. I have already said literally. However, there is, as usual, probably nothing that can be changed, because it will be the same as it has been since time immemorial. When prophecies, probability calculations, as well as predictions are made and publicized by those with the knowledge, then they will only be laughed at, frowned upon, and described as lunatics. Or they will even be harmed, will be persecuted, severely denigrated and slandered, and finally even their life will be sought. That will probably also not change in the future.
It has actually been like this since ancient times and will also remain like this for a very long time to come. We said that already.
I thought so. Well, lately somebody called me a liar because he heard the story from somebody that in 1977 I did nothing but worked for 5 days and 5 nights. Eaten and drunk something in between, then worked on, and did not sleep a minute. You see, such things are not accepted as true either. It was thrown at me that I would be a liar, because it would be impossible for a human being to work that long and not sleep.
The fact that you did it, however, is testified to by a whole range of group members. It is understandable, though, that the aforementioned fact is not acceptable to outsiders because, firstly, they have not witnessed it themselves like the group members, and secondly, It is indeed the case that it was an unhuman achievement that is simply impossible for a normal human being. If the whole thing had happened with the usual normal powers of an Earth human, it would indeed have been impossible. For your part, however, you have used your powers of consciousness in such a kind and wise that you have been able to achieve the tremendous performance, which has remained a secret to us too up to the present day, even though we know its origin. Truthfully, it is the case that if a human being does not sleep for 24 hours, even if he or she does not perform hard work thereby, then his or her condition is the same as that of a drunk by alcohol with 1 promille alcohol content in the blood. Thus, it is inexplicable to us how you managed to do it during the construction of the hall in the center in October 1977 too, without a constant supply of cerebral stimulants of the amine group, work through 5 days and 5 nights uninterruptedly, with only short meal breaks, only to then give a long, correct, and detailed lecture on the 6th day from 14.00 to 00.30 in the hall, which was overcrowded with around 100 people. You had at that occasion even to answer questions as well. But that, my friend, exceeds even our understanding and has remained a mystery to us to this day. And in fact, your performance is actually practically impossible in every respect. So it is certainly understandable if uninvolved persons do not accept the story despite many testimonies, because they simply cannot understand it.
On a shift basis, Engelbert, Bernadette, Jacobus, my wife Renato, Micho, and their wives were also there, as well as also several others, so I did not work alone.
That is of rightness. Nevertheless, all except you have always slept a few hours a night, have gone about their external work, and have then, during the night time, participated again in some hours of work while you were uninterruptedly on your feet, as you would express it in your manner of speaking.
Already enough. Let us leave this, because I still have some questions to ask. At the official 215th contact on 28th of February 1987, we spoke of Sodom and Gomorrah. In response to my question about what had actually happened, you explained this here, which I read aloud, regarding this. There are several factors to be mentioned. On the one hand, a meteorite fell to the earth and exploded high above the area of the 2 cities, which would today actually be designated as larger villages. This led to devastating destructions of both cities, and also caused a severe earthquake, by which the earth was also torn open, like in Petra's case, and small and larger chunks of sulfur were flung up and across the land by underground volcanic activity, which of course also caused a lot of calamity, and as a result of which, as well as by the exploding meteorite, many human beings were killed. The remaining part of the total destruction was triggered by the megalomaniac and irrational god of the Hebrews, an extraterrestrial who had his headquarters deep beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza. His punishment for the disobedience of the population of Sodom and Gomorrah against his commands was that he had 2 small atomic bombs be ignited over both cities, which finally leveled everything to the ground and killed all human beings and animals. So much then from your explanation. But now I have been asked about other things, which I could not completely answer based on the explanations of Siphiath and Simyah say. Hence the question was asked how the Dead Sea came into being, on whose shores the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were located. And it was asked where the volcano had been, and why no ruins of the 2 cities have been found so far, and so on.
In fact, these questions have never been discussed, which is why I will deal with them and provide some further explanations. So listen then. The Dead Sea is not really an ocean, but a salt lake without runoff with a lot of potash salt and bromine salt, whereby the total concentration is to be calculated with 33% in the so-called Jordan Trench. As you know, it is in Arabic language.
Called Al-Bahar al-Majid.
That is what I was about to say. The Hebrew name is Yam Hamalah Desrosin, Dead Sea, which, however, is also known to you. The lake is 15 kilometers wide and 80 kilometers long and covers an area of 1,020 square kilometers. Due to the peninsula Lisan, as well as due to solid sediments of salt, the lake, that is to say the Dead Sea, is divided into a small basin in the south and a large basin in the north. The Dead Sea is about 400 meters deep, and the bottom of the Dead Sea lies at the deepest point 829 meters below sea level, which is the deepest depression on Earth. The origin of the Dead Sea can be traced back to a primeval earthquake, during which the salty and partly rocky earth was deeply torn open and formed a deep canyon, in which in the course of time many waters accumulated, especially through the very ancient Jordan, which flows into the Salt Lake in the north. Then about 4,500 years ago, the big catastrophe occurred, as I explained on 28 February 1987. However, in order to explain the events of the volcanism and the invisible ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah in more detail, the following shall be said. The events with the meteorite, the ignition of the two small nuclear bombs of the irrational god, as well as the volcanic eruption and the earthquake, took place within a few hours and thus in rapid succession. There were two earthquakes, the first of which had a magnitude of 6.3 according to the terrestrial Richter scale, and the second, a magnitude of 8.6, which resulted in devastating consequences. Since the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were built on very unstable and loose ground in the near-shore area of the Dead Sea, both cities slipped due to a huge landslide into the Dead Sea and sank on its bottom. The landslide was caused by an enormous water pressure from the ground, from which water was pressed up, causing the layers of the ground to liquefy and slide. From the beginning of the landslide to its end and until everything disappeared in the Dead Sea, a time of just 27 minutes passed. This is the reason why practically no ruins of the cities can be found in the shore areas of the Salt Lake. Only scattered ruins which were located outside the cities remained and were buried under sand and dust. The fire, however, which rained from the sky before the two cities were completely destroyed and sank into the Dead Sea, consisted of glowing chunks of sulfur and glowing soil, whereby everything was flung up from within the ground by enormous volcanisms and rained down on the cities. This volcanism, however, was not of the usual kind as it appears with normal volcanoes, because it was truthfully a methane volcanism, which means that methane gases ignited inside the earth in large chambers. Physics. This led to tremendous explosions, which tore open the ground in several places, eventually forming smaller craters, from which the sulfur chunks and the glowing earth were ejected, thereby causing, so to speak, fire to rain from the sky. Is that enough?
Yes, thank you.